up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I am your host, Zach Guggenheim, and we are here for the Week 6 picks. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, to subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts, whether that be Apple or Google or Spotify, wherever you get those podcasts. Make sure you subscribe and follow. Leave a review. Let us know how we're doing. For Week 6, we are just going to be focusing on the Big Ten games. There's 5 Big Ten games this week. I'm going to try to go a little bit more in depth on each of them. Honestly, I didn't have a lot of time to dig into any other games, and so I really wanted to focus on those 5. There are 4 non-conference games that I'm very intrigued by. They're all involving at least one ranked team in those contests. Some of them are obvious. So Alabama plays Texas A&M this week, and Georgia plays Auburn. I'm curious about both those games. I don't think either is going to be particularly close. You know, after seeing what Georgia did to Arkansas, shutting down that run game, I think Tank Bigsby might be able to do something on that defense, but I'm not sold on Bo Nix. I don't think he is a great passer. But Auburn has some guys that can do some things. So we'll see. I think Texas A&M is in a lot of trouble with the injury. They just have looked hapless over the past few weeks. Arkansas, Ole Miss, the battle of the beaten teams from last week. Arkansas got shut out by Georgia. Ole Miss got beat up on by Bama. Who wins that game and kind of keeps at least some pace in the SEC West? And then you have the Red River rivalry in the Big 12, Oklahoma and Texas. Can Steve Sarkisian make a big splash in the first year as the Longhorns head coach? And can Lincoln Riley keep the Sooners undefeated and on track for the playoff? Some really, really nice games there. I'm going to first talk about the Big Ten games, and then we're going to take a commercial break. And then I want to pose a question about Cincinnati, because right now, it looks like Cincinnati has a clear path to the playoff. But the question I want to pose is, does Cincinnati have a BYU problem? Does Cincinnati have a BYU problem? And there's more to that than just BYU, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. But before we do that, we're going to go through the picks, and then there will be a commercial break. So first game, we're going to look at number 11 at Rutgers. It's a 12 p.m. kick on the Big Ten Network. Michigan State is a 5-point favorite. I saw Rutgers up close and personal on Saturday, and I really thought Rutgers was going to offer more resistance against Ohio State. And there were definitely times where they did in the run game in particular. Obviously Travion Henderson had the big run early in that game, but there were a number of times where the Scarlet Knights got Ohio State to third down. They limited some of the more normal runs, like that would typically be 7 and 8 yards. They kept it to 3, 4, and 5 yards. And so there were definitely moments where Rutgers did some things defensively. Now, it doesn't look like it because Ohio State would counter with Chris Olave, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Garrett Wilson, and all their speed on the outside, as well as Jeremy Ruckert. They got the tight end going in that game. Jeremy Ruckert's a stud, by the way. Love him. But I do think Rutgers is better defensively. Fatukasi is a legit linebacker, a potential all Big Ten linebacker at Rutgers. They have some guys on the defensive line that can really make things tough. And Michigan State, while they have some guys on the outside, Jalen Redd, Speedy Naylor, their offense is predicated on the run game. And that's where Rutgers is strong. And so I think Rutgers can probably limit Michigan State at least a little bit. I don't think their defense is as bad as they showed last week against Ohio State. I think Ohio State's going to do that a lot to a lot of teams as they get their groove with CJ Stroud. On the other side, I think Michigan State, they've looked really good. They're 5-0, coming off a bounce back year from a really bad season in the COVID year with Mel Tucker. Kenneth Walker has been a stud, but something that's not been really talked about is their defense. Their defense is allowing over 420 yards a game. They surrendered a lot of yards to Miami and De'Aaron King. Now, granted, Miami looks worse, but De'Aaron King has been out. So, is that a matter of Miami's offense being better and now all of a sudden they're not as good because of the quarterback injury? But Michigan State allowed over 300 yards to De'Aaron King. They were outgained, I think, by almost 200 yards against Nebraska. And honestly, as I looked at the stats more and kind of watched that game back a little bit, Nebraska seemed like the better team. They just shot themselves in the foot. And so now Michigan State has not allowed a ton of yards on the ground. I think they're allowing a little over 120 yards on the ground. And so I don't think Rutgers is going to be able to score enough to win, because I think Michigan State will be able to put points on the board. I do think Kenneth Walker will get going probably more in the third and fourth quarter. Rutgers has got to be tired. They went to Michigan. They've played Ohio State. Those are two very good offensive lines. And so I would not be surprised if they wear down in this game just because they don't have the depth that some of these other teams have. But I do think Rutgers will sting them a couple times. Similarly, last week, Aaron Cruikshank got open on a 75-yard touchdown. Isaiah Pacheco is still a guy that can exploit you on offense at the running back position. So I think Rutgers will score, but I don't think it'll be close to enough. I think Michigan State wins fairly easily as they get into the second half of the game. I've got Michigan State 35, Rutgers 20. Maryland at number 7, Ohio State, 12 p.m. on Fox. It is not the big noon kickoff game, which is confusing because it's on at noon and it's on Fox, but it's not their highlight game, because obviously the highlight game is going to be later in the day. We'll get to that at the end of the show. But it is on Fox. Ohio State's a 21-point favorite. This is a tricky game for this reason. Which Maryland is going to show up? Is it going to be the Maryland that showed up against Iowa and got curb stomped? Or is it going to be the Maryland that beat West Virginia, that was able to hold on against Illinois? And listen, Maryland, I think they have the type of talent on the outside that can exploit some things on defense for Ohio State. It's really a shame that Dante Demas is out for the season. That's a huge, huge blow to their offense. And I don't think what you saw against Iowa, at least for their offense, is indicative of their team offensively. Right. They turned the ball over 7 times, which is crazy. Talia Tagovailoa threw 5 interceptions. A couple of those are really bad passes, but some of them, they were tipped. It was just a hair inaccurate and it turned into an interception. So I don't think Maryland is as incompetent offensively as they showed. I think part of that honestly was, Maryland was about to get the ball back. It was 10-7 at the end of the first quarter, and Dante Demas has that gruesome injury. He fumbles the ball. Iowa gets a short field, and then it's off to the races from there. I think a lot of the energy got sucked out of the stadium for Maryland. And so I don't think Maryland I think they're going to show up on Saturday. I think they're going to score a couple of touchdowns. They still have guys, right? Raheem Jarrett, Tyler Fleet Davis. They have a good stable of running backs. And Ohio State's defense, they look better, but let's be honest, Akron and Rutgers will cure a lot of ills on defense, right? Rutgers was a really good matchup for them as we look back, because Ohio State has gotten much better at defending the run the past couple weeks, and Rutgers can't really throw. But even Rutgers had a big play on them. They had a 75-yard touchdown with Aaron Cruikshank. Raheem Jarrett's better than Aaron Cruikshank. Like, Cruikshank is a fine player. Raheem Jarrett is a future top round pick, most likely, if they develop him right. He's got speed to burn. He is really, really effective as a route runner. But the issue becomes he no longer can draw single coverage because Deontay Demas is now out. And so that is going to be a tough blow for them. So I think this is close going into halftime. Maybe like a 28-21 or 21-14, maybe even like a 21-21 game going into halftime. I do think ultimately Ohio State will pull away. I think Travion Henderson has a monster game. I think Chris Olave has a monster game. And I think they will exploit some things. Because listen, Ohio State's offense is starting to figure things out. Maryland's defense struggled with Spencer Petras and Tyler Goodson. They're fine players. Tyler Goodson's a good Big Ten back, all Big Ten honorable mention type of back, maybe a second team all Big Ten type of back. And they got over 400 yards on him. This is a whole nother level. Travion Henderson is one of the top 5 running backs I've ever seen at Ohio State. And he's just a freshman. Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson are 2 of the top 10 receivers I've ever seen at Ohio State. Jeremy Ruckert is a really nice tight end. Jackson Smith-Njigba could probably be a number 1 receiver at most other schools. He's the number 3 receiver. And the offensive line is starting to gel. And that is going to cause a lot of issues for Maryland's defense, which quite honestly, I thought was better. But they proved against Iowa and Kent State, quite honestly, they are not where I thought they were. This is going to be a explosive game, a lot of points. I do think Ohio State covers. I think they put up 63 to Maryland's 28. I think they run away with it in the second half. Wisconsin at Illinois. It's a 3:30 kick on the Big Ten Network. Wisconsin's a 10-point favorite. Graham Mertz is questionable going into this game. And quite honestly, he's been questionable as a player all season. I don't have a lot of faith in him. I don't have a lot of faith in their offense. I thought their running game would be decent. It hasn't. Ches Malusi, right? Their other backs have not been all that effective. Their offensive line hasn't been great at getting a push. And I just am skeptical about them at this point. They've had 2 really rough losses with Notre Dame on a neutral field and then at home against Michigan. And now they have to go to Illinois, where I could really see them looking ahead, saying, okay, this is where we get everything together and we'll be okay. Meanwhile, you have Brett Bielema, who used to coach at Wisconsin. He knows their culture, knows how they operate. I think Brandon Peters is playing some better ball. I think they have a little bit of momentum. I know it was just Charlotte, but they have played. They're playing better. It seems like they're getting some stuff together. I don't think Illinois is more talented. Like, let's just be honest. They're not more talented. But I just don't see Wisconsin being able to move the ball all that well against anybody at this point. I mean, they struggled against Eastern Michigan. Eastern Michigan's bad. And they had a tough time moving the ball. And I've not seen any progress. Their quarterback is questionable. Everything behind him is meh. And so I think Illinois gets the upset here. I think Illinois wins by 4 at home. Illinois 17, Wisconsin 13. The next game, number 9, Michigan at Nebraska. I spent half of a podcast talking about how this is a game that could save Scott Frost's career. And I think Scott Frost is going to at least make them think about saving his career. If you look at all the quarterbacks that Michigan has faced, Graham Mertz, a bunch of nobodies at Western Michigan and Northern Illinois, a true freshman at Washington who lost to Montana, and then Noah Vedral, whose claim as a quarterback was he hasn't thrown an interception up until Ohio State. Like, he's not a great quarterback. And while Adrian Martinez is, he is turnover prone, he is mistake prone. He's also dynamic. He can run. He can throw. He's got a receiver in Toure who can burn you. They have some defensive weapons. They have Cam Taylor-Britt. They have some boys on the defensive line. Settle in those boys. They're playing some good ball. JoJo Doman. They have some pieces. And listen, the metrics are saying Michigan is right up there with Ohio State in terms of their S&P Plus metrics and their efficiency ratings and all that stuff. I'm not sure that Michigan is better than Oklahoma. And Nebraska gave Oklahoma everything they could. And that game, I believe that game was at Oklahoma. Nebraska is playing some really good ball, except for the turnovers and the mistakes, right? By good ball, I mean, they're starting to play up to their talent level. They're starting to compete. And Michigan's 5-0 start, honestly, I think is more smoke and mirrors than even Michigan State's, right? Because they beat up on some 3 meh teams. And then Wisconsin and Rutgers, they really struggled with Rutgers. Now, I think they let them back in the game. But I'm very curious. Nebraska's coming off a game where they scored at will. They controlled the game from start to finish. Michigan has been in a couple of battles with a lot of hard hitting, a lot of tough situations for them. And I still don't buy Cade McNamara. Now, maybe they switched to JJ McCarthy at quarterback at some point. I know he came in the second half at Wisconsin. But I can't believe I'm saying this because I've been on the fire Scott Frost train since before the season started. But I am buying Nebraska in this game. Nebraska 27, Michigan 20, on the legs and the arm of Adrian Martinez. Michigan has not faced a quarterback like him. So I've got two major upsets this week in the Big Ten. Last but not least, the big one, I think probably a preview of the Big Ten championship game. Number 4, Penn State at number 3, Iowa. It's a 4 p.m. kick on Fox. Iowa's a 2-point favorite. And I think there's a couple of key questions that I have in this game. One is, can Sean Clifford avoid what no other Power 5 quarterback has avoided? And that is the turnover bug. Iowa has forced 12 interceptions against 3 Power 5 opponents. That's absurd. I mean, that is 4 interceptions a game against Indiana, Iowa State, and Maryland. And listen, Michael Penix has not looked the same, but he's still a decent quarterback. This year, he's really struggled. Brock Purdy is a good quarterback. Talia Tagovailoa was really playing well, and they turned him over 12 times. Now, one of those interceptions was a backup coming in relief for Tagovailoa, but fact remains, it's no longer luck, right? They scheme to turn you over, and it works. Can Sean Clifford avoid the dumb plays, the turnovers, the dumb mistakes? On the flip side, can Penn State force Iowa to drive the length of the field? Can they force Iowa into long to long fields where they have to go the length of the field. So a friend of mine, Chris Ebersol, shout out to you, brother. He made this point. If you look at the Iowa-Maryland game, the reason why they scored so much, yes, they had a lot of yardage, but look at all the short fields they had. They get turnovers in plus territory over and over and over and over. And that's how they amassed the huge lead. And so, and it's combined with Sean Clifford and him not being turnover prone. But if you look at Iowa's offense with last week notwithstanding, they have struggled against mediocre to bad teams on offense. Colorado State, Kent State, they struggled against Indiana. They had less than 200 yards against Iowa State. The reason why they won that game was because of turnovers. And so, yeah, they have some guys, Sam Laporta at tight end. He's a good tight end. Spencer Petras, I think, is an underrated guy. But I don't think their offense is anything that Penn State's defense is shaking in their boots about. I think, and Iowa fans might get mad at me, I think offensively, I think they're probably similar or less than similar. They're maybe less as talented than Auburn. And Penn State, they limited Auburn quite a bit. Now, Tank Bigsby got his because he's Tank Bigsby. But listen, Tyler Goodson's good. No pun intended. But he's not Tank Bigsby. Spencer Petras is good. I'm not sure he's better than Bo Nix when he's good. And I'm not sure that their lines are better than Auburn's lines, with one major exception, and that's Tyler Lindenbaum at center. He will be the best player on the field for both teams. So I think it's a tricky game to pick. I think both teams are really, really good. I think the X factor of this game is Sean Clifford with his legs. Noah Cain has struggled to run the ball. Lee, their second string, has looked really good, but then he fumbles. He's had ball security issues. And so how are they going to get some semblance of a running game? And I think it has to be the legs of Sean Clifford. Buying time in the pocket to throw to his ridiculous receivers, Jahan Dotson, Parker Washington, Brenton Strange is tight end. And can he run enough so that they have some space to hit some plays down the field? Can he do that? And can he protect the ball? Because in this game, a punt is a win. If Penn State can punt, I really believe that Penn State's back seven, and I think that there's a really underrated matchup that, again, Chris had mentioned to me, PJ Mustipher against Tyler Lindenbaum. I think that's going to be a heck of a matchup. But I think if Penn State can protect the ball, force Iowa to try to drive the length of the field, I think Penn State gets enough offensive production that they win in the fourth quarter. I think it's going to be a classic, just like some other big Penn State Iowa games at Iowa City. But I think Penn State pulls it out 23, Iowa 17. I think that is going to be a heck of a game, and I think might be the preview of the Big Ten championship game, because I think Penn State right now I think they look really, really good. I think Ohio State is going to have something to say about that, but I like them. I like their team. I think they continue to get better. And let's just be honest. No one in the West is coming close to Iowa at this point. It would be a Herculean effort for a team to rise out of the West to challenge Iowa. So those are the 5 picks. Let's take a quick break, and then we will talk about Cincinnati, the Bearcats. Welcome back to the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. Does Cincinnati have a BYU problem? Now, you might be thinking, why are we talking about this on the Big Ten Football Talk podcast? Cincinnati, not a Big Ten team. BYU, not a Big Ten team. But I think it helps give context to the national scene. So let me explain why I'm picking BYU in particular. BYU is getting no buzz right now in terms of playoff consideration. They're ranked 10th, which you're like, okay, they're 10th, but they probably have no shot to break through. But I want you to just look inside their schedule and the numbers. BYU has beaten Arizona, Utah, and Arizona State. Arizona State's ranked 22. Utah was ranked at the time that they played. They're not ranked anymore, and I don't know if they'll get back to being ranked, and that matters. And Arizona stinks, okay? Granted. But that's 3 Pac-12 teams, 3 Power 5 teams. Meanwhile, Cincinnati has played Notre Dame, big win, Indiana, and then Murray State and Miami of Ohio. So, like, what's impressive again? Notre Dame, yes, and then a bunch of nothing. And it's sad because I think there was a lot of hype around Indiana going into the season, but Now let's go back to BYU for a minute. So they played 3 Power 5 teams. They play at Baylor, Big 12 team. They were just ranked. They lost to Oklahoma State, but Baylor could pick up some wins, get ranked. At Washington State, probably not going to get ranked. Virginia, maybe they'll get ranked. They just had a big win over Miami. At USC, probably not going to be ranked, but maybe they've got some talent. I don't expect any of those teams to be anything more than maybe a fringe top 25 team by the end of the year, but it's still 7 Power 5 teams from 3 different Power 5 conferences. They also, I think they play South Florida. Let me look at their schedule here. They play Boise State, which Boise State's not that great right now. They play Idaho State, and they play Georgia Southern. Okay, so a bunch of nothing there. But aside from that, they're playing a Power 5 schedule. Compare that to Cincinnati. Cincinnati plays SMU, who's ranked 24. And then they play a bunch of AAC scrubs. Just to give you insight into who they play next, they play Temple. Temple's probably one of the better teams on their schedule the rest of the way. Temple got beat by 40 plus against Rutgers. Okay, that's like maybe their 3rd or 4th best team on their schedule. That's not good. You know, the schedules don't match up, and yet Cincinnati's getting a lot of buzz about being a playoff contender. Listen, let's look at the Indiana-Cincinnati game for a minute. Indiana was leading that game into the 4th quarter. Indiana has lost by 25 to Iowa, was never in it. They lost by 24 to Penn State. They were never really in it. And honestly, they might be on its way to a bowl-less season. Like, they have to play Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State. And so that Power 5 win does not look good anymore. So the whole resume for Cincinnati hangs on one win in South Bend. And while I really like Desmond Ridder and the Bearcats, and honestly, I would put them and I'd put BYU in if they go undefeated, because I believe in undefeated teams, and I hate the system the way it is. They have 2 major hurdles with the playoff committee. One is obvious, and this is where the Big Ten gets involved. Just compare a Big Ten team with 1 loss to Cincinnati. I'm going to compare them to Ohio State. Ohio State has 1 loss. They lost to Oregon early, but if they win out, they have a top 25 win over Iowa in the Big Ten championship game, Penn State, Michigan. they'll have gone on the road to beat the same Indiana team that Cincinnati beat. And imagine if Ohio State beats Indiana by 40 plus. That's another data point in favor of Ohio State. Like, who's the committee going to put in at that point, right? They're probably going to put Ohio State in. And my point there is this. It's not necessarily about the Big Ten, as here's the BYU problem. If you have to consider both those teams, it is a lot easier to disregard both of them. Because you put Cincinnati in, you better put BYU in. Like, look at BYU compared to Cincinnati. 7 Power 5 wins to 2. 2 ranked wins at time of play to possibly 2 ranked wins if SMU keeps it up. The only difference right now between Cincinnati and BYU, the only difference is that Cincinnati was hyped up at the beginning of the season, and that they were hyped of having 2 big time opponents on their schedule. Well, now they only have 1. And imagine if Notre Dame tanks it the rest of the season. Like, they play Virginia Tech this week. And, you know, I said in an earlier podcast, maybe they run the table and it's easy. But after seeing them against Cincinnati, are they going to make it out of Blacksburg? I'm not sure. Like, if Notre Dame goes 8-4 or 7-5, Cincinnati has no argument. And even if Notre Dame goes 11-1, I think Cincinnati's argument is very, very slim, and it becomes more difficult because if you have to compare them to BYU, I will tell you right now, the committee is going to prioritize better strength of schedule and bigger brands over both those teams. Like, it's going to be really easy to put in a 1-loss Georgia or a 1-loss Alabama or a 1-loss Penn State or Iowa or Ohio State or Michigan over any of those teams. It's going to be a lot easier to put a 1-loss Oklahoma in over them. It doesn't matter that they're undefeated. Like, their schedules are weak and BYU's is stronger. So I think Cincinnati has a big BYU problem, because if BYU, and here's the thing, if BYU loses a couple games, then it really helps Cincinnati, because no longer is the committee thinking, well, what do we do with both of these teams? They're now thinking, what do we do with Cincinnati? And I think you can make an argument, a good argument for Cincinnati, that they deserve to be in if they're undefeated compared to a lot of 1- and 2-loss teams. But if they have to compete with another group of 5 team that has a better resume, that's going to get really dicey for the Bearcats. And so I think for Cincinnati's sake, they still have a lot of things that need to happen to get to the playoff. First and foremost, they need BYU to lose so that there's no comparison with a group of 5 team. And honestly, I think they need a lot of losses ahead of them, because I think even if it's just Cincinnati, if it's between Cincinnati and Ohio State, as much of a fan as I am, I would put Cincinnati in. But if you look at the committee and how they have valued eye test, resume, all that stuff, they're going to put in Ohio State every time if they have 1 loss. So I think Cincinnati has some work to do, but for their sake, BYU needs to lose. And for BYU's sake, I think Cincinnati needs to lose, because if they start comparing group of 5 teams, they're in trouble, because they'll find a good reason, in their minds at least, to throw both of them out. And so they need one of them to lose so that it's one team from the group of 5 to stack up with the mess of Power 5 teams that they're evaluating. That might sound convoluted, but I really think it's something that is going to come to play if BYU keeps winning. So my hope is that Cincinnati can keep winning out. I don't know if that's going to happen. I think the disaster scenario for the group of 5 is if BYU loses and SMU beats Cincinnati, then SMU is not going to get in the playoff as an undefeated team, unless if everybody has 3 losses. In that case, I think SMU might sneak in, maybe, probably not. So Cincinnati has a big BYU problem, and the group of 5 has a big playoff committee bias problem. So we're going to talk more about this. I mentioned on the last pod, we're going to do a couple things next week. I'm going to do my normal recap video. I'm also going to try to do a mid-season review where we're going to take a look at the hot garbage I put out at the beginning of the season. Remember how I said Texas A&M was going to be the number 1 seed in the playoff? That was wrong. That was very wrong. Wrong indeed. We'll take a look at that and more. We'll take a look at all the ridiculousness. We'll also kind of go through some Heisman contenders and things like that, stuff I haven't really talked about here on the pod yet. And then I'll do my week 6 or my week 7 picks next week as well. So that'll be on the schedule for next week. Thanks for listening to the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. Really appreciate you guys. Again, remember to like, subscribe, follow, leave a review, and we will see you next time on the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. Thanks for listening. God bless.